Good evening. Welcome to the first lecture in SCI-Arc's spring evening lecture series. We are very happy that we're thrilled actually to have Didier Faustino joining us tonight. And we're also very happy that we have our electricity back so we can have this lecture. Didier, his work, he is described often as both an architect and an artist, something that I find particularly relevant in terms of how the disciplines define themselves in the contemporary context and how we can think of the role of the architect. So his work really provokes thought. It provokes thought about how we deal with categories, with how we understand our position in the world, with how we understand our position vis-a-vis the collective and the private. And the idea of architecture as something that can provoke. So I would say Didier is an agitator, he's a provocateur. Even more so than, first and foremost, architect, artist. His projects invite or even compel us to reconsider aspects of ownership, property, fragility, and even danger, which I think have an increasing relevance, especially today, literally today, literally. This work, I think, is really gives us many things to reconsider and to consider for the first time. I think his work has an urgency within our contemporary social, political, economic, and environmental context, the way in which he addresses questions of the environment, the way in which his work can be at once political, but is also an act of design, an act of creation. I first had the opportunity to hear Didier Faustino speak about his work at a symposium in which we both participated at the École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris in 2009. The conference was called Metaphors in and on Architecture and Urbanism. And I was struck by Didier's presentation. Really, rather than focusing on metaphor, he embraced what I would call straight talk and literality. This can be seen in the literal transposition of a stairwell from a social housing project to an open public space in the project Stairway to Heaven. This was done in Castelo Branco in 2001, where he detourned, to borrow a word from the Situationist International, the everyday object, the social space of the housing project, and created a public space which was for individual use. So really transforming what we would consider to be something everyday, mundane, and pedestrian into something that really transports us to a different kind of space. Faustino raises important questions regarding the position of the architect, situating the architect as a provocateur where the aim of the work is not to solve problems, but rather to make us aware of their existence, I think, as any good architect does, and to point out the opportunities as well as the limitations of our endeavors. For example, Body in Transit from the Venice Biennale in 2000, a mobile, occupiable shipping container, comments on the living conditions of illegal immigrants, something also extremely relevant, literally, today. Ghost in the Shell, exhibited here in LA at the LAX art space that many of you know in 2009, and I think we should bring it back here again, it's very relevant, transforms the LA vernacular of the chain link fence that might otherwise benignly denote the perimeter of a suburban lot into a forceful statement on the boundaries between private and public, personal and communal, that have undeniable currency given today's political stance, one that threatens to build more walls rather than to facilitate increased communication. Faustino's subversive stance and the critical edge that distinguishes his work challenges us to question our own position and the politics of the body politic, technology, environment, and the ambiguous relationship between the public domain and the intimacy of our contemporary society. Faustino has designed several mobile architectures for private clients and international events, including the Art Plage Mobile of Jura for the Swiss Expo, the temporary autonomous zone for Art Basel, and the Hermès H-Box, which has traveled to the Tate Modern, the Centre Pompidou, the Bayerle Foundation in Basel. He has exhibited in France at the Frac Center, the CAM, the Magazine de Grenoble, Portugal, Japan, also the US, LAX Art, as I said, and the Storefront in New York City, among many other venues. He has been invited to more international biennials than I think anyone I know. There's a list here of Venice, Taipei, Yokohama, Sao Paulo, Istanbul, Beijing, etc. Didier frequently lectures at major universities and international institutions. And in 2009, he founded and curated the first Bordeaux Biennale Evento dedicated to art in public space. Faustino is currently working on a library and cultural center in Mexico City for the Fundación Alumnos 47, an experimental house in Spain for the editor of Solo Houses, as well as a winery in Portugal. He currently teaches at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London, and as well as all of these endeavors, he is also the editor-in-chief of the French architecture and design magazine Cré. I hope I pronounced it correctly. So I would like to invite you to join me in welcoming Didier Faustino to SCI-Arc. Thank you.
Thank you, Marceline. What can I say now? I would like to thank SCI-Arc for this invitation, and especially Hernan Diaz-Alonso and also Stéphanie Etlin to take care about my venue. I will make a presentation. I just want to cut my cell phone. Here I am. I started a few years ago with an office called, in Paris, an office called Miss Architecture. This name doesn't mean really nothing at the beginning. It was just a kind of tribute to, for me, the most important architect in the 20th century, who was Douglas Gordon. And is an architecture, the one who show us architecture is probably something different what we think, and push the boundaries of our discipline. Our discipline is a discipline who today is very large. I would say it's not anymore due to the context, political, development, ecological, etc., is not anymore only the discipline of construction, of building. It's something else. It's something more for us. Issues, many issues in the world appears, and using this first one, who is Le Radeau de la Méduse picture from Théodore Géricault, reminds me about the emergency to be involved and to try to do something, to think differently. I would like to start this lecture with, let's say, the context, and the context we live, this context of this new century, where we are the actors, and a quote coming from Chuck Palahniuk, who became very famous in the movie by David Fincher in '99, 2 years before 9/11, who was Fight Club. And this quote was, "We are front row seats for this theater of mass destruction." We designed some projects about situations, about what we think is the most important today. one of the most important things is probably the global warming and weather change. And about front seats, we designed this tower, this broken tower, who will be the most fragile building in the world for Amazonia, to be the place to look about the coming disaster. I would like also to quote on this picture something which is politically incorrect, a quote from Fraction Armée Rouge, Red Army, in the 70s by Andreas Baader and Ulrich Meinhof, who was talking about illegality as the only liberated territory inside metropolises, and about this emergency we have today to take position. About taking position, I will make a small back in the history. And because my practice is based in Paris since 2 decades, quite 2 decades now, I will talk about 3, for me, interesting and major persons who were not architects. One was an architect who was Vauban. They were all working for Louis XIV and the King Louis XIV and the idea of the progress. And they invent what we can say, or what we can describe as the beginning of Siècle des Lumières. One was Feuillet, the one who invent the notation about choreography. The second one is Vauban, the one who invent the defense and the architecture, military architecture, and the gardens by Le Nôtre. Coming from that, I make a small jump to, let's say, our contemporary situation and the one about the 20th century, where the power was, in one way, taken by the population, taken by the citizen. It still continues. And I work on a project who was called Memories of Tomorrow, using a very, very simple element about control, who was the barrier, the rioters' barrier, the one called in French Barrière Vauban. This Barrière Vauban, we decide to transform it and to change the use of it, to produce something for our cities, something who can be looked as an element of changing habits, of giving meanings, different meanings about occupation of what we call the public space. Public space is a notion which interests me because it's probably the most open situation, what's mean public, what's mean private. Here we have a kind of choreography or an organization of what is the most difficult to quantify with population movement, population transition. And we decide at the studio to work on this proposal of designing new public space with just this element of organization and to give a new meaning to these elements. The first application was for the Jardin des Tuileries as a figure. So these Memories of Tomorrow became part of the garden for a transient moment, a very ephemeral moment. And then the project was transformed in a more active proposal, who I called Love Songs for Riots, using policers and anti-riot officers and guards to sing songs about what is freedom. One of the songs was the Bizet song, L'amour est enfant de bohème, love is a bird in cage. About that, my proposal changed 2 years ago by the invitation by the new Biennale of Chicago. And I, this moment, decide to change a bit the project and not to make the project as it was a kind of critique of analyze of a proposal about our society, but to be more involved in the situation and in a way to build something, not to transform something, but to build something. And I built this element with a kind of arm or a kind of weapon, I don't know, a piece of metal, to build a riot, to build something to defend the ones who are weak. Weakness needs to be protected. So we design this build the fight, an element who can produce a protective island, a protective territory in case of danger. That was the piece exhibit at the Chicago Biennale with these three things, light, where I wrote resist, occupy, and I don't remember the third one, but it should be something in the same thing, in the same way. As an architect, I always have been fascinated by one piece of design, one machine, let's say, with the machine to produce coffee. And I was looking about that, the cafetière, I don't know the word in English, but the coffee machine, let's say. And I was looking about this element, very simple element, about one thing. It's an architecture, and it's an architecture of transformation. It's an element where two components, water and coffee, mix together to generate a new situation. This situation and this transformation is called percolation. Percolation came, it's an element of the theory of the dynamic systems, with basically how two fragile situations can be joined together and transform on something else. My work is always, I've been always around the notion of body, as architecture is. Architecture cannot exist without the body. The fragile situation is the body. Architecture is the, let's say, the context to transform this fragility on something else. That's the point I'm interested. I'm interested on this fragile situation, and the work I develop until now, and I will show you tonight, is about this thing, about mis-situation where, as an architect, I can or protect or transform or generate a new situation. 5 years ago, I was invited to Biennale of La Havane to produce an architecture there. I was attracted by the Scuola of Ballet by Garatti, who is a kind of fellow of the Utopia of Revolution. I will show you the film at the end we produce. But the thing was, more than an architecture, I decided to produce a protective element, a kind of shelter, protective shelter for citizens, for people to explore the failure of revolution. These elements were this kind of, let's say, protective element, was a support for these people to film their reality, to film the context of their life. I would say that's really complicated to be an architect today, because probably we don't need us. Nobody needs us for the act of construction. What we need is us for thinking the cities, thinking about transformation and giving maybe not answers, but questioning our life and our cities and world. One of the pieces I show here, and now I will show you some pieces about this idea of transforming, of fragile context. The first one was this kind of portative architecture where the only thing is designed is this element, this helmet, who is a silencer to have a kind of discussion between two persons. I always travel in these two situations. Some people define me as a person between art, architecture, between different disciplines. I want to see myself just somebody who the practice doesn't have any scale. The scale is not important. What is important is the question I bring on the table. This project was for the Portuguese Foundation Gulbenkian, and is called Future Will Be a Remake. And it's just this object without numbers, with making a loop around two pillars, and more you use it, more it disappeared. I'm fascinated also by the question of the minimum existence. How can we provide the minimum security environment for surviving, to be in a way safe or in a way protected? Alfred Hübner in the 20s designed this minimum dwelling, who was a kind of humoristic proposal. But he shows one thing which is very important for me, who is the question of human needs. One of the first projects, or my first project, was the house for these kids, a house with 2 floors, made with nothing, just in a small village, just with the dynamic of these kids. These projects bring me quickly to this very simple conclusion. We need to build situations who are able to transform, to bring new feelings, new situations. On this line, one of the first opportunity I had was to do a project for the Paris Museum of Art, Modern Art, for a show. And the Modern Museum of Art of Paris asked me to design the lecture hall where the philosophers, art historians will come to discuss for 6 months in the place, very famous place in Paris with Couvent des Cordeliers, where the French Revolution started, the first talks of French Revolution, public talks start. And I take a very simple material, who is the most ambiguous material too, was developed by big companies for the space research, with this, what we call the survival blanket. And this material is used on the satellites by the NASA and hold transportation, because it's really thin, super light, and have high qualities of reflection. At the same time, this research became something that became popular and became very democratic in the use. And now we can find it for the rescue, or even for the homeless. In the winter, you see a lot of this material. So I take this material, which is a kind of the most normal material we can find and most ambiguous, to build a very fragile chrysalid in the museum, in the space. A kind of chrysalid we can, in a way, embrace the fragility of the talks, of the thinking, of the philosopher, of the people who talk, of the people we discuss, and to protect, in a way, the most beautiful thing, with the freedom of speaking, of exchanging ideas. After that, or before that, I'm not really clear about the chronology of my work, but I was invited for the Venice Biennale, and the topic of this Venice Biennale in 2000 was about the notion, in a way, of ethic? And I couldn't answer to this question. It was more ethic, less aesthetic. My proposal was to take the most, let's say, unacceptable situation I find, and to try to build something about the most impossible or the most unacceptable situation at this time, and probably until to now, is the condition of the migrants who, from the place they live, go to another place to find a better life and to try to survive. In this case, in the mid of 90s, a lot of situations happen, like kids, young persons who try to keep flies illegally to come into Europe, and most of the time they die. I propose to build an unacceptable proposal, a very, very first-degree answer to build the minimum existent shelter to carry the fragility of the situation, to carry the unacceptable or the invisible situation of these migrants coming to Europe. And I built for the Biennale this body in transit container, and I put it without mention in the middle of the space. After that, a few years after, the situation doesn't change. What can be the effect of my disappointment? So the only territory maybe to work with now is the domestic space. So I decide from the domestic space and the usual material we put with the carpet to build the minimum space to survive, or maybe not to survive, maybe to hide myself, my body, a home suit, my own suit to survive, to protect my body or to hide my body. From that, from this single body to the collective body, came another project with, in a way, more or less the same proposal, who is about home, a home for one person to protect our singularity in a world where everything became the same topic, where the individuals doesn't exist. A house, 1 square meter house, a house who basically just use 1 square meter on the floor, who can be reproduced industrially, a kind of proposal where we can imagine we can survive for 1 night, live for 1 month, and protect our privacy. At the same moment, at the same time, we can exit and occupy the collective and the public space, because in this house you can't bring nobody. About this notion of individual or collective, a project with a kind of reverted proposal with urbanism. It was actually an interesting competition. I don't remember when, but it was mid or end of the 90s. It was for Roswell to build a competition for, comment on dit en anglais, for aliens housing, a kind of crazy competition. And what for me was interesting, I don't take part to competitions, but this one was probably the only one I think I take part for about open competition. This one was talking about aliens. And for me, what was interesting at this time, because also Roswell and let's say the irony of the name of alien, the word alien, is it the ones who come from the other space, from far space, or the ones who come from the other side of the frontier, of the border. And I decided to build an architecture, to propose an architecture who will be the most simple, the most idiotic architecture, who is actually, if you take this drawing and you just turn a bit, it's a mix between the head of an alien and the ears of a Mickey Mouse. In the ears of the Mickey Mouse, you have the privacy, and in the head of the alien, you have the public space. And you generate architecture, a kind of non-stop, ambiguous architecture who can be adaptive to any conditions. It's also a kind of critic, I don't know, about how we design the cities, how we design actually social situation, and we segregate cities in different areas. Anyway, I would like the next slide. Sorry. I think my computer, something is wrong. I don't premeditate. It's a computer. Well, I will start it. Okay, so we can make a small stop, 2 seconds, sorry. Let's Okay, that's the critical moment, so believe me, it's not on purpose, but so now I don't have the... Okay.
Scan has completed. Warning. Advanced Mac Cleaner has...
Okay. I was talking about borders, aliens, the aliens who are not the aliens, and just to talk about one project which is very important for me was this project for a storefront in New York, you know, storefront, with this space, this very famous space designed by Stephen Hall and Mr. Aconci, with a blurring space between private and public, it kind of extension where basically the facade open and generate this kind of troubled space. My proposal for the storefront was very simple. Actually, what I experienced there, what we discovered there is this blurring situation is still not blurred because basically one part of the wall is still the border between inside and outside. And my proposal was to create an inner space to materialize the in-between, between outside, between inside, between private, between public, between individual, between collective. This project was just at the end of George Bush mandate, and it was the moment of Guantanamo. And what I proposed was to propose or to create or to materialize this in between and to push the people, to force the visitors to get in from one part to the other one to get in and to experience this situation in between, this situation where you are nobody, you are the only one with yourself to trying to find a way to get in or to get out. Inside it was a show with a film called Ghost in the Shell, where you can see here. This film was about identity. One person would change identity, who basically the face transformed and became a monster. Monster for who? A ghost in the shell, a host in the hell. This title is a tribute to Pierre Huyghe and the Philippe Parreno project, Anne Lee, about they bought a character of manga. It's also a tribute to the manga Ghost in the Shell, and that just put out the G and the S, and the project became Host in the Hell. Just after that, the LaxArt invite me, Laurie Furstenberg and the LaxArt invite me to come to LA, and the new era start here in the US. It was East Coast, West Coast, probably not the same relationship to the public and the private space in the city. The new era start with Obama, and so it was a kind of project with two layers. It still talk about borders, it still talk about crossing the borders, how to cross the borders, how to avoid the difference between, how to look through the judgment of the others, of our relationship to the others. So my proposal was just to twist the chain link icon element to make a transition between the entrance of the LaxArt and the exit in the back of the LaxArt. From that very recent project with just a pattern, a kind of ironic anarchist pattern, who will not be built, but I would like to build it. I lose a bit myself, sorry, with this incident. All these projects I show you are always about situations and about producing architecture or environment who are able to, in a way, modify the occupant or the user. habits. One of these is Home Palace, an apartment we designed for China, for Beijing, in 2006-07. The client asked us to design the most luxury apartment. What we propose is about luxury, the notion of luxury, is a bit to change this notion, or to take a quote of Hervé Guibert, I will talk about after, who said, who have a very beautiful sentence saying, the most luxury thing, it's time. So what we propose to the client is to invert the hierarchy of the domestic space, and who is usually the entrance of the apartment. It was an apartment of 140 square meters. To change this small thing where the entrance is the most small space with this in-between space between outside and inside, and to inflate this space to become the most biggest room in the apartment, who is this box where in periphery all the activities of life can happen with no luxury furniture. Nothing is luxury. The only thing who is luxury is the space of the entrance himself, who became a non-stop space, a space to lose time, a space to do for nothing, just a space to be there and lose your time. And to do many things, whatever you want, of course. We are in the school, and usually one of the questions, I'm teaching also in a school of architecture, and many times about architecture, we need to give some text and some lectures and some reference. My biggest reference for architecture and thinking is this small text by Hervé Guibert. Hervé Guibert was a French writer. We died in the 80s with AIDS. He was the lover of Michel Foucault, and he wrote this beautiful text. I don't want to translate it totally, but what is beautiful is the last sentence, with the vice should become a public service for free, and governments should organize competitions to give prize for the ones who create architectures vicious. About vicious architecture, the most vicious or ambiguous space for me is the staircase in housing. These staircases are the space of all ambiguities, of all troubles. It's the space where negotiation between private and public occur, the space where many things can happen. It's not the space of public, it's not the space of private, it's the space of negotiation. And when Portuguese city and government invite me for this competition of public space with 1,000 of square meters area to design a public space, I propose them just to take exactly the design and the drawings of the housing, social housing block nearby, and to keep the staircase and to put it in the middle of the public space. That became a public space for individual use, to show also about what is here, about an ambiguous action with this sport, with basketball, who can be seen as a collective or individual or typical element of growth of social life. Anyway, here you can see the housing block, social housing block, and here the stairway to heaven with the cage on the top of it, like maybe ironically there is no escape. I'm not a very depressive or negative person, but sometimes on the work we should produce things. This project have not been inaugurated since it's built. The different mayors, one after one, didn't know how to deal with. Finally, last year, a new mayor arrived and decided to just paint the stairway to heaven, and it's supposed to be open now. I need to go there. Public space for individual use, individual space for public use. A house for a French artist, Fabrice Hibert, a house where the collective became the norm, where the individual doesn't exist. At the beginning of the lecture, it was this drawing about a performance of Laurie Anderson, where she said, I'm in my body, as most of people drive their car. So I'm a stranger to my body, or something like that. I designed this house in the same way. It became a machine, a house where basically the body is an instrument who should be repaired and execute a series of activities. A house where the privacy and the public became the negotiation, became the house himself. A house with no windows, a house who can be open, a house where the privacy, the interior became the extension of the outside, where the outside became the extension of the inside, a house with no limit, a house where people, bodies, are machines, a house to escape, a bit like this swimming pool on the top of the house, where you cannot swim because the structure crossed the swimming pool. Anyway, a house who doesn't have identity, a house called the untitled house. From this notion of entitled about identity, identity is probably also one of the things, the notions we need to look about when we design, when we think, and when we produce for somebody. The next project, this project, the bunker, porcelain bunker, it's a project of a house who protect nothing, just an ephemeral moment, the moment of love, the moment of bodies meeting to make love, bodies suspended, bodies free to do what they want, a house not for domesticity, but for undomesticity, a house for wildness, a house who can be broken, a bunker of porcelain. This project introduced me to the one I'm developing now in 6 years with, so far, probably the first project with a big scale we are working on, with a library, art center, and meeting conference place. It's for Mexico City, a city under pressure. I will not say a city in kind of war, but a country in a very difficult situation between narco-trafficking, politics, corrupted, and etc. A city where being young, it's not easy, a bit like Luanda, Tel Aviv, Beirut, and many other cities where the danger occurs, where each day it's a winning to survive. The owners of this space with this foundation called Alumnos 47, from the name of the street, with the street called Alumnos, who means les élèves, the students, thank you, asked me to design a building where situations can happen, where a program of a library can be seen differently. I take this concept, very simple, of percolation and theory of the fluids. as I was telling you before, to work with the program was a quite complex program, and to propose the design for something will not be just a building to contain books and people to work on these books, but something a bit different, in a way how to split the program and to design something to generate something else. A kind of ruche, a kind of honeycomb system where things can happen from many, many directions. A situation who can be open to new situation, to unexpected events, a space for mis-architecture, for situation, for relationship, for unexpected. Here is the first stage of the project. It was a totally free project where no entrance, no exit, where the people can go and just access to the two storage space, taking books and create events in between, a space of in between. The idea was also not to make a facade and a formal door, a formal access point, but just something where bodies, people, population can get in. From that, that was the first stage of the project. We didn't have the permit to do the project because basically the security was not able to be done and etc. So the city doesn't give us the permit. So we decided to rework on the project and to go back to the primary ideas. Was the first one here, to a second one where the in-between inflate and became himself the building. It's a building who will be built between two streets in the middle of one block, a bit like a coral shelter, will occur different trajectories, no program inside, just the possibilities to generate flux. The two facades of the building will be exactly the same. We will have a series of points inside of the building, and what happens in the building will be totally unpredictable. It's just like I said before, this percolation system with a building with able to generate new possibilities. The building himself started a few months ago. We started the construction site, we broke the land, we started the mock-ups, and administration came to us and said, there is a problem. We will close the construction site, and we are seeing them negotiating with the city hall and all the administration, and now the decision, because time, etc., and symbolically we want to finish the building for 2018, we decide to stop the project and to change to another stage, who will be a project, a kind of leap in the void, a project where the program will not be on the site, but will be in different points of the city. So I will come next time to show you the new project. Talking about leap in the void and the movement, a project was called Opus Incertum, another scale, a kind of safe project to experiment the most beautiful piece of art of the 20th century, with a Yves Klein leap in the void. I think everybody knows this project, and we designed a way to experience the leap in the void, but safety. About safety, some more dangerous project, the double happiness, to talk about equilibrium, about fragility of our society. Actually, is in Shenzhen, just near what you see is the OMA building here, who is the trade, La Bourse, the trade market of Shenzhen. In the same series, the Flatland, about talking about Abbott and the 2 dimensions, and what will be the next dimension we can find is just an event who will never happen. Somebody trying to touch the screen and never touch the screen, a kind of state of unreal. About unreal borders and hope, because it's also talking about hope, doing architecture. A small house, a very small tea house between North and South Korea, in balance between the 2 situations, the 2 countries, with 2 situations, one empty, one plain. Sky is the limit is the project we built just near the borderline, where you can see 2 rooms, one who is totally open to the elements, to the climate, and the other one who is totally enclosed, open and closed situation. About that, I will say, in this society of le spectacle, of spectacular society, Guy Debord wrote this beautiful book called Ingerum imus nocte and consumimur igni, who means I will be burned by the fire, and we turn around during the night. We design a public space with a space for the people met together near the telecommunication tower in Brittany in France. This project will never happen because the city doesn't want it, but for me it's the best project probably we design as a public space. A space for spectacle, a space for events, a space to be together and to think about consumption with the palindrome here. Event, architecture, I don't know how long I speak, if it's long or not. I will conclude with a very simple project we did in Paris, historical place with the garden of André Bloch, the engineer and sculptor, who was also the one who created Architecture d'aujourd'hui in the 20s. How to build something there, to build something for the unexpected, something to change the habit of this place, a place, a space for events, a space to change, a space to experience something else. I'm still a zombie in this world. I'm still somebody who don't know and won't know, who doesn't want to be sure of him. I'm the one who walk and don't know where I go. But what I'm sure is today I'm here in this beautiful country, America, United States, and I didn't know how to conclude this lecture, so I bring a project I designed for Mexico, for the condition of Mexico, the civil war in Mexico, who was based on, for me, one of the most beautiful moments of history in this country of migrants, the country where the nobodism, the movement, is part of the idea, the country where moving, changing all the time is the point. So for Mexico, I make a proposal, a movable democracy, a portative democracy, secure, closed, to go everywhere in the country for the people to get in and to talk safely without being seen by the snipers, the ones who want democracy disappeared. It's the portative democracia was built in Mexico. Just to tell you one thing, we need to continue to fight, to think, to exchange, and to exist. So I will say thank you, and to conclude, I will show you two or one film. If I can, I need to see. It's a sad movie. It's not really a movie, it's more a trailer who comes from Cuba. And then we can discuss if you want. So thank you. And I will apologize for this chaotic lecture, but thank you very much.
Futuro, quello che non è che tutti, il futuro è quello che abbiamo tutti, no? È un futuro drammatico.
Das war.
Amo el espacio, amo el movimiento, la interrelación. Amo los sistemas abiertos que se nutren de intercambios. Odio los sistemas cerrados que sofocan. Amo el viaje, la aventura, también como metáfora. El viaje como investigación. La investigación como conocimiento. El proyecto como conocimiento. Un duende que te acompaña, que te da la justa dosis de inconsciencia, que te ayuda a tener fe en el proyecto, que no te espanta de frente a aquello que los procesos orgánicos autogeneran. Amo los lugares oscuros, los lugares del misterio, las ojeades de oscuridad y luz. Amo el barroco. Encuentro perfecta la palabra de Vedova. De toda arquitectura anterior, es lo que más se acerca a nuestra sensibilidad, aquel construir en la luz, aquellos planos dinámicos, me parece que hablan de una movilidad afín al espacio contemporáneo. Toda época tiene características propias y la nuestra, por diversos datos, me parece caracterizada por la no mesurable, por la decadencia de lo clásico a priori, por una perenne movilidad, lo contrario del concepto puro, de la moral instituida, de las leyes establecidas. Amo el barroco, amo su instabilidad, amo su permisividad total.
Just after the revolution, Cuban revolution, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro asked to 3 architects to build the biggest South American school of arts, a campus. And they come to La Havana to build this unbelievable space with total freedom. And at one moment, the buildings were quite finished. They decided to stop it because it was the freedom was not the thing they want to show to the people. So these buildings became ruins before have been completed. The man who speak in the beginning is Vittorio Garatti, one of the 3 architects. He's still alive. It could be a sad story, but it's also a beautiful, or more a beautiful story, because it's a story of hope. He still believes his architecture will be finished one day. He still believes architecture can change the world. So thank you very much, and voilà, merci.